This presentation will discuss selecting an intervention for your applied project. In this presentation, we will review how you should go about selecting an intervention based on your baseline data, as well as how to write a draft of the methods section of your applied project. In order to select an intervention or a teaching strategy for your applied project, you will start by reviewing the literature. Typically, this review of literature for a research project would be quite extensive. However, classroom teachers seldom have time or resources to spend significant amounts of time to do a complete, thorough review of literature that would meet publishable standards. And it's not necessary. For this project, you will need to spend some time in the library searching the database for peer-reviewed research articles related to the baseline data you have collected. You should be asking yourself, what would be a good teaching strategy I would like to try? It is important to read through quite a few interventions or strategies, and then just pick one that you want to use. It might be that you pick part of a teaching strategy that can be implemented in the short amount of time. For example, if you were working on handwriting, you might run across a program called Handwriting Without Tears. While this entire method would be too much for you to focus on during this intervention, you could implement part of the program. There are some other strategies you might run across. For example, if you were trying to change behavior, you might find that a token economy or a visual schedule or even a social story might work. If you were working on increasing fluency, perhaps you would find research related to the use of flashcards that describe a very specific method. In order for the intervention or teaching strategy you will use for your applied project to have an impact, it would be good to try a teaching method that you have not already tried in the past. When you are describing the strategy, you need to write with as much explicit detail as possible. You will need to provide detail about the intervention itself, as well as about the procedures for implementing the intervention. For example, if you were describing the Reading Mastery curriculum as your intervention, you would not just say, I will be using the Reading Mastery curriculum, which is a research-proven method to remediate reading. You would need to provide very specific details about what the teaching strategy entails, such as using leveled readers, teachers introducing targeted vocabulary, etc., as well as how these procedures will be implemented in your project. These details need to be very clear. At this time, it is also important to note that assessing is not teaching. Here's what I mean by this statement. You might choose to do a 1-minute timing in reading or math to help build fluency. In your mind, this might serve as an assessment because you can get a frequency count, as well as an intervention because they're practicing the skill for 1 minute each time. However, this 1-minute timing can only be part of the intervention and teaching strategy, but it should not be the entire strategy. You need to think of how else you are going to teach the child to improve fluency. Are you going to identify sight words that the child is struggling with and teach those in a targeted way? Or are you going to identify math facts that focus on the fours to help the child improve their math fluency? What are you going to do to teach the child a new skill in a new or different way that is outside of the assessment? This is what you are describing when you describe the intervention. Please note, the intervention or teaching strategy should not be a worksheet. While you may have a worksheet as part of the intervention, the strategy must not be solely based on this activity. Once you have selected an intervention or a teaching strategy to try, you will write the methods section of your paper. The methods section should include the following headings: participants, materials, intervention, procedure, and data collection. Remember, writing this paper is like writing a thesis, so you will need to use headings throughout the paper. In the Participants section, you should provide a concise summary of the student or students who will be utilized in your project. As you have already listed this information in your Introduction section, or you will be listing this information in your Introduction section, you can be clear and concise with providing this information in the Methods section. For most of you, talking about the participants will result in one paragraph of writing. The Materials section is just a listing and description of materials that will be utilized in your project. If you are making your own materials, please include a sample of these materials as an appendix. An appendix is something that you add on to your paper that goes at the end of the paper that provides additional information about topics discussed in your paper. You would reference this appendix by saying something like, for a sample of the number game, see Appendix A's, only you would use whatever material it is that you created in this description. If you have yet to create this material, that is okay. Just use the text here as a placeholder in the draft section to remind you to include this paper when you submit your final project. The intervention section of the paper is simply a description of the teaching strategy you will be using. For example, if I were writing about using a social story intervention, I would say that social stories are stories that teach social skills by providing information about the social situation. However, this is not nearly enough detail. I would also need to describe how the social story is created, what type of sentences compose a social story, who social stories are utilized with, and how to read the social story to students, as well as any other pertinent information that I found by conducting my literature review. I need to make sure that I present information so the reader has a clear understanding of what the intervention is. This is simply just an overview of the intervention that you will be utilizing, and for most of you, this will be about 2 paragraphs in length. In the procedure section, you will describe in 1 to 2 pages the step-by-step process you will use to implement this intervention. Think of it like a form of a lesson plan, even though it is not a lesson plan. Write down what the teacher will do and what the student will do each day. By reading this section, anyone should be able to implement the intervention in the same way you do. Finally, you will talk about data collection. The data collection section is really just your assessment section. In here, you will describe in detail how you will assess the effectiveness of your intervention or teaching strategy. First, you will describe your quantitative data collection methods. These are what you used in your baseline data collection procedures. Then you will also write up which types of qualitative data you will use. All of you will be using 2 types of qualitative data. Qualitative data are important to be combined with quantitative data in order to provide a clear picture of the progress of the student. In this case, your qualitative data will be anecdotal notes, which you collect on the student's performance, as well as field notes, which you collect as the teacher. Please be specific about what you are looking for when you collect your anecdotal data on the student behavior. Once you have completed each of these sections, you will submit this as a draft of your methods section. You want to be as complete as possible. However, your instructor will provide feedback to you related to the draft you submit. Then you will have a chance to incorporate this feedback into your final project. If significant changes are needed to this methods section, your instructor may choose to have you resubmit this draft more than 1 time in an effort to help you submit an excellent final project. As always, if you have questions, please forward these to your instructor right away.